Oregon football has zeroed in on a pair of five-star recruits here in the 2024 recruiting class, and we've got new analysis and intel to start your week. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, your premier podcast for all things Oregon recruiting and Oregon football. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. It is Monday, August 21st, 2023. A little bit of a rainy, cold morning here in Long Beach, California, with Hurricane Hillary passing through last night. Luckily, didn't get anything too crazy in my neck of the woods, but some heavy wind and some flooding. But we're all doing okay, and I know that a lot of people out there were more adversely affected by it than I was. So definitely hope everyone's doing all right. But the show goes on. So got a new episode of the podcast for you guys today. Thanks so much for tuning in. However you're tuned in, whether you're on your podcasting platform of choice or here on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're tuned in, and share the Ducks Dish podcast. We're coming at you 5 days a week now. That's the goal. And a little bit later than I wanted to get this one uploaded to start off the week. But like I said, the show goes on and we're still here. So high school football more or less resumed / kicked off throughout the country last Friday, and I found myself in, as usual, I'm in a talent hotbed, so I made my way in Southern California to the Inland Empire to Corona, California for the number 1 Mater Dei Monarchs against the number 15 Corona Centennial Huskies. Mater Dei won this one 28-14, but it was a lot closer game than I think a lot of people were thinking about. So I want to talk about kind of some of my thoughts on that game and then get into a couple of recruiting updates, which I know is what you guys came here for. So make sure you stick around for that. So 28-14 final, like I mentioned. Just to start things off with Mater Dei, I think that a lot of people expected this one to be a blowout, myself included, because I covered this game last year and it was close for maybe half a quarter or a quarter. But Mater Dei looked sloppy. I think just by their standard, for sure, the preseason number 1 team in the country, according to Max Preps, couldn't really get into much of a rhythm early. Stanford quarterback commit Elijah Brown honestly didn't really look like himself. I've covered, I want to say, a good 4 or 5 games now with Elijah Brown. And he was pretty off, overthrowing guys, didn't look super composed. Not trying to be critical of him. Obviously, he's a great kid, great player, but just isn't what I have gotten used to. And I think part of the reason for that, just for Mater Dei as a whole, not just Brown, they weren't able to get a scrimmage before this game. So I think that was part of the reason that they still had some kinks to work out and ultimately looked sloppy on Friday night. But some of their big-time playmakers definitely still showed up. Brown was able to settle in later on in the game, connected with Jonah Smith for a long touchdown, connected with Marcus Brown for a touchdown. He kind of worked his way back to the ball. He's a really underrated receiver at Mater Dei here in the 24 class. I think that their underclassmen are so highly rated and so touted, and people are excited about them that they don't talk about Marcus Brown enough. But he is really, really good. I think he had 2 or 3 touchdowns in last year's game against Centennial. So he is certainly one to keep an eye on the West Coast. And then Jordan Davison did his thing, number 1 back in the 25 class. Nate Frazier, didn't see a whole lot of him. New Georgia commit. He was a little bit banged up. I think he hurt his shoulder early on in that one, but the Monarchs were able to eventually get going. Their defensive line was harassing Hassan Longstreet all night. New Corona Centennial quarterback, 2025 class, who transferred in from Inglewood. Mater Dei did surrender over 100 yards on the ground, which is not something that they typically do given their size at the point of attack. But really not a whole lot of offense going for the Huskies on Friday night. They were able to get some points on the board with a short touchdown run, and then there was a pick 6 of Elijah Brown towards the end of that game that kind of made it interesting, but they were able to take care of business. So 28-14, Mater Dei comes out on top over Corona Centennial to start off the 2023 season. And it was a fun one. It was just nice to be back under the Friday night lights, be back on the field, smelling that turf, hearing the oohs and ahs and the excitement, and just talking to people around the Southern California football scene to try to get more plugged in and obviously get a better feel for some of the guys that are up and comers. So with all of that said, let's get into our first update. We're going to be talking about Brandon Baker. Brandon Baker is a 5-star offensive tackle in the 2024 recruiting class and is a name that a lot of Oregon fans have become familiar with that follow recruiting. Because you know the details. If you've heard about Brandon Baker, his older brother Gary played for the Ducks during his college years, played defensive line. But now we're wondering what's the latest with Brandon Baker. Like I said, he's a 5-star guy, and it's someone that Oregon has really been looking like they're in a great position with throughout his entire recruiting process. But now there might be a little bit of a change of tone here in this recruitment for Brandon Baker. He has, let's see, what update do I want to get into to start things off? How about we talk about visits? So update on the visit front for Brandon Baker. Hasn't been to Eugene in a little bit, but he does have one trip on the schedule right now. That is an official visit to Lincoln to check out the Nebraska Cornhuskers on September 16th for their home game against Northern Illinois. And that's the only trip on the docket right now on the agenda for Brandon Baker. An official visit to Nebraska with Matt Rule. Talked about how he loves that program and the direction that he has the Cornhuskers going. Trying to kind of have a bounce back season. And they've been recruiting very well under Matt Rule, Nebraska has. So I think that they're definitely an interesting team to watch in this recruitment, especially because now that I think back to it, there was a little bit of excitement as far as a package deal between Baker and Dylan Raiola, the number 1 quarterback in the country, who eventually committed to Georgia and now moved out to Georgia to play for Buford. He faced off against Michael Van Buren, an Oregon quarterback commit out of Baltimore, Maryland, St. Francis Academy on Friday. They won that one in a shutout, 18-0. But as for Baker, Nebraska has some buzz right now, as you would assume, with that official visit coming next month. But a couple other schools are still in close contention right now as far as kind of who's on him the most, who have had the most consistent contact. You have Nebraska, who I mentioned, and then Baker also told me that he's hearing a lot from Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Oregon. So Oregon is staying involved here, but some other schools have really gotten involved. And those are some big-time schools. I asked him about Texas. They're a school that I feel like has an awesome shot in this recruitment. He was saying, quote, "I'd say it's definitely one of the schools that I'm heavily looking at the moment. Coach Steve Sarkisian, a West Coast guy. They have Coach Flood down there. He was at Alabama. So really just kind of see how they go throughout the season. Their first game, they got a big one. That'll probably be the first test." So Texas is no stranger to making some big headlines on the recruiting trail. Even looking here recently at the class of 2024, they landed a commitment not too long ago from 5-star Duncanville edge rusher Colin Simmons, who is ranked on some outlets as the number 1 edge rusher in the country. So they're definitely surging on the trail on a national scale. Certainly headed to the SEC. I think that's a big part of the appeal for a lot of recruits right now. But Texas is a major player from Brandon Baker. I'm telling you that right now. I read the quote from him, and then you also have just the job that they've done at the offensive line position. And there's one guy in particular that I think is making a lot of buzz right now, and that's tackle Kelvin Banks. Kelvin Banks is one of the best offensive linemen in the country heading into the 2023 season, 6'4", 318 pounds. If you remember him, he's a former Oregon commit out of Humble, Texas, Summer Creek High School. And I think he was a preseason All-American. So I know that Texas isn't necessarily known as an offensive line factory, but Kelvin Banks, he's one of those guys that they are super excited about. And as of right now, it looks like he is really, really trending up. So if you're looking at the recruitment of things, I'm telling you, Texas is a contender. They're going to sell the development more or less of Kelvin Banks and kind of try to get Baker to hopefully follow in the fold of Banks. And it's not a unique pitch necessarily. I told you guys, if you've been reading my stuff, Alik Terry and the Oregon staff are kind of selling Josh Connerly Jr., Oregon's projected starting left tackle, former number 1 tackle in the 2022 class. They're not only selling his development. Baker told me that he has his eye on Connerly's development and what they're able to do with him this year under Alik Terry. But that combo of having number 1 tackles from 2 different classes on the same line, because that's really what Oregon could potentially be doing here with Josh Connerly Jr. this season. And then if they can land Brandon Baker here in the 24 class out of Mater Dei. And another important update that I got from Brandon Baker on Friday night is what his decision timeline is looking like, because that's obviously a very huge development and kind of a point that a lot of people want to talk about when you're looking at any respective recruitment. So let me see here. What do we have on a commitment date or a commitment timeline for Brandon Baker as he starts his senior season? Brandon Baker is a guy I've talked to him a million times, and since I moved to Southern California, and in the spring it was kind of okay, more so December National Signing Day, early signing day is kind of what he was looking at, but now it sounds like he might be moving things up. I asked him on Friday and he said, quote, sometime between September and October. That's what it's looking like right now. So with that recent development, I think you probably have an idea that he is closing in on the decision as of right now. And then he also said that he was looking to slim it down within the next week or so. And it looks like he's probably going to be releasing a top 5. So while I do expect Oregon to make that updated top 5 for Brandon Baker, one of their premier offensive line targets, I don't know if I would say Oregon leads for Brandon Baker right now. I'm not making a prediction elsewhere, and I'm not moving on my prediction just yet, but I'm still in that information gathering phase and trying to get a better feel for this recruitment as Alik Terry navigates his first full recruiting cycle as Oregon's offensive line coach. So like I said, this is the first time that, like I said, I've interviewed Baker quite a few times, and I've always felt good about Oregon's chances. But this is the first interview that I've had with Baker where I feel like I left it thinking that he is trending away from Oregon. If I had to make a guess right now, I'd probably say Texas or Nebraska, but I'd lean more Texas right now. I think he's probably leaning towards Texas is kind of where I'm putting my pick at the moment. So we'll see what happens as far as a decision date. We'll see what those schools look like when he releases that updated top 5, but he might have just told me what it was: Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Nebraska, Tennessee also reaching out. Baker also has taken a visit to Florida State. So that's a little bit of a newer school that has been a competitor in this recruitment. And then you also have the Georgia Bulldogs, who were at one time interested and making their case there. But I feel like they have a pretty full offensive line class from what I can remember. So maybe they won't be a major contender as of right now. And maybe you wouldn't think that because Baker said he hasn't really been hearing from them. They weren't one of the ones that are on him super hard. But as for Oregon's chances here, let's peel it back a little bit. So he hasn't taken an official visit to Oregon. And I think a lot of people see that on the surface and they think, oh man, what's going on? Like, why isn't he taking an official? But it's not off the board. It's not as if it's for sure not going to happen because I asked about the possibility of taking an official visit to Oregon. And he said, quote, I'm really just kind of playing it by ear. The plan was really kind of have them be the last official, see what I'm feeling throughout the timeline, and just go from there. So, like I said, I feel like Brandon Baker is trending away from Oregon, and this is one of those reasons why, in my mind. Maybe I'm putting too much weight into it, but if that was going to be the last official visit before he committed, that makes me think Oregon was in the lead, take this last official, iron out all the details or whatever, and then hop on board. But it doesn't seem like that's the case now, especially since this Nebraska visit is coming up in September, and he very well could be committing in September to his school of choice. He still says that he has daily contact with Alik Terry, who has been his lead recruiter in this one. Dan Lanning has also been involved, and Baker said, "quote Yeah, I'm still pretty interested in them. I kind of have to see how it goes, see how it's looking in the season to possibly go down to some games." So, like I said, an official visit to Oregon is not completely off the table for Brandon Baker, but as of right now, it's not looking super likely. It just kind of from my latest thoughts and analysis after that interview, and he's already taken so many unofficial visits to Oregon. You kind of ask yourself, what is there to really get out of an official visit, especially if, in his mind, some of these other schools are still involved. He's already taken an official visit to Ohio State. I know that. I don't know if he's taken an official visit to Texas, but like I said, Texas and Ohio State are some of those other schools, but Texas and Nebraska, I think, are at the forefront right now for Brandon Baker. And there's one more thought that I kind of have just regarding this recruitment and kind of where Oregon stands and how they've attacked it, what kind of developments that we've seen. I think when you, as a fan, I think you can see, if you look at it through a fan's perspective, Oregon's been leading. They've been in the driver's seat. They've been in a great spot for Brandon Baker for so long. And then now you hear about Texas getting involved, maybe leading, Nebraska getting involved. And I think in your head, you automatically think, well, what's the staff doing wrong? Or what are these other schools doing that Oregon isn't doing? And just based on some of the people that I've talked to, in Southern California and maybe around Eugene, it seems like he maybe isn't as big of a priority as he has been previously for the Ducks. Oregon already has a pretty solid offensive line haul right now with Jaquan McRoy out of Alabama, Trent Ferguson, Devin Brooks, two in-state guys, and you also have Fox Crater. So there comes a time in some of these recruitments where you just have to kind of reevaluate things and kind of see where you're at, see which guys are really those priority guys, those must-get guys. I think Baker has been that for Oregon because of the legacy connection, because he's a West Coast guy, because he's a 5-star. But it maybe feels like he's not as much of a priority as he has previously been for the Ducks in this recruiting cycle. So this one's not over. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up taking an Oregon official visit at some point before this recruitment is wrapped up. But I think the biggest takeaway is that I don't feel like Oregon is the obvious and head and shoulders above the rest leader in this recruitment for Brandon Baker like they have previously. So the two schools that you have to keep an eye on, in my opinion, are Texas and Nebraska. So those are kind of some of my latest notes on the recruitment of 5-star Santa Ana, California, Mater Dei offensive tackle Brandon Baker. Taking a little sip of coffee here on this Monday morning. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, coming at you on YouTube as well. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Been getting a lot of comments in some of these recent videos, so I'm going to work on getting back to you guys and responding to some of those today. But absolutely love it and greatly appreciate the support. We're closing in on 2,400 subscribers, so help me reach that mark, and we'll just keep cranking up the Oregon football and recruiting content. All right, the next guy that I'm going to be talking about is another 5-star on Mater Dei. We're talking about 5-star 2024 defensive lineman Aydin Breland. Aydin Breland is, I'd probably say, one of, if not the top remaining targets uncommitted for Oregon here in the 2024 cycle. 6'5", 290 pounds. 247 Sports Composite views him as a 5-star, .9836. Number 35 player in the country, number 6 defensive lineman, and number 3 in California. So What's the latest that we have on Aydin Breland? I was able to talk to him very briefly after Friday's game. And now it looks like there's been some buzz that he's going to be trimming things down, cutting his list of suitors. And he said, quote, just time to make a decision. Me and my family have come down to make it a top 4. It's going to drop pretty soon. So as of right now, what do we know about Aydin Breland from a visit standpoint, where he's been able to get out to recently? Over the summer, he was pretty busy. He took official visits out to Oregon, to Georgia, to Texas A&M, and to Miami. So if you're trying to figure out which 4 schools it might be, I think the official visits are usually a pretty decent indicator of that. So all that said, I think that Oregon's going to find themselves in that top 4 whenever it does get released. We've heard about Oregon and Georgia as 2 major players in this recruitment. So the Under Armour All-American is definitely getting closer to finding that next home for him. So top 4 is the next step for Aydin Breland. And then after that, you would probably think that a commitment would be the next step. So what's the latest on the decision timeline for Aydin Breland? Well, he said, quote, still up in the air. We're still trying to figure out logistics and the place and everything else that goes into that. That's all with that. So not a whole lot of specifics on a commitment timeline for Aydin Breland, but we do have an update as far as visits go, because any visit that he takes between now and ultimately making his commitment is going to be one that's under a microscope. And you could probably be pretty sure that whoever gets that trip, if he does take any more visits, is going to get a pretty good shot or have a pretty good shot. So will Aydin Breland get back on the road before he makes his commitment? Here's his answer. Quote, as of right now, there's no visits scheduled. I don't plan on taking any more. If something does come up, it comes up. But as of right now, there's nothing planned. So Aydin Breland looks like he's getting closer to making his decision, and maybe he's seen everything that he needs to see from a visit standpoint. Maybe that's why he doesn't feel like he needs to take any more visits. These trips, as cool as they are, guys, I think that maybe too often we don't talk about how taxing all that travel is on these guys. So it's not something that is super easy to just make a trip super last minute and fly across the country. However, Oregon is, I think, the West Coast school that's in the best position to potentially get another trip or potentially get this commitment, because you don't have schools like USC that are in the mix, or Washington, or any other of those Pac-12 schools. Another thing that could be going in Oregon's favor here is I believe they were the school that got the most recent visit, the most recent official visit for Breland at the end of June. So you have some recency there that helps. I know that Oregon was trying to get him on campus for Saturday Night Live at the end of July, Oregon's annual recruiting camp. They were able to get a commitment out of that one when 4-star, cornerback Dakota Fields flipped his commitment from the USC Trojans to the Oregon Ducks on the heels of their move to the Big Ten. Also had 5-star Missouri defensive lineman Williams Winery on campus for that one, as the Ducks tried to kind of make their final push in that one, but he ended up staying home to play for Elijah Drinkowitz and the Tigers. So Oregon's doing a really good job here, especially in Southern California. You have Dakota Fields out of Gardena Serra, Dylan Williams out of Long Beach Poly, and Kamar Matudi out of Los Alamitos now. So that's a corner and 2 linebackers. So they're doing a really good job. Also have Jordan Anderson and Dylan Gresham, a pair of talented wide receivers, also out of Southern California. And you have Jack Ressler out of Southern California, wide receiver out of Mater Dei. So they are cleaning up when it comes to Southern California talent, and Breland very well could be the next one. What else do we have with regard to what he's looking for? What kind of criteria is he looking for at his future home? He said, quote, I'm going to tell you everything that I tell to everybody: genuine family feel, great coaching staff, NFL development, just a place I can call home, just a place that I love. I love the fans love me. I love the school. I feel that it's a perfect fit. It's just everything. It's just perfect. So I think Oregon checks a lot of those boxes, but I think some of these other schools do too. I know when I've spoken with Breland, he's spoken very highly of the Oregon coaching staff and just the work that they've done to recruit him and kind of what stands out about Oregon. So that said, what stands out about Oregon? That's what I was asking him. He said, as of right now, quote, as of right now, they just the home on the West Coast. They'd just be my home if I were to stay on the West Coast. Like I always said, I love Tosh Lapoy, I love Dan Lanning, and I love Coach Tony. Like he's talking about Tony Tuioti. That coaching staff they have is legit. So definitely some strong words there. I mean, not anything that we can take too much away from, but this is definitely a recruit that Oregon is in the thick of it for as we kind of head maybe towards that 11th hour, towards that commitment. Wouldn't be surprised if that top list maybe even comes out this week because Breland was looking to commit kind of end of summer, early season. So anything that comes out now would probably be, it probably makes sense just because it's around that similar timeline. So that's kind of the latest intel that I have. Let me give you a little bit of analysis on where I think Oregon stands with Aydin Breland. Clearly a top school, but there's something else that I think kind of goes into this and kind of what we're able to take away from some of these interviews. I've interviewed Breland a number of times, so you kind of get a feel for how a guy interacts with the media, how he feels about recruitment, how he feels about sharing some of those details. And, you know, I think I really left that interview with Breland as, you know, this guy is just kind of over the recruiting process. Maybe doesn't enjoy the interviews a whole heck of a lot. And I don't say that to be critical. I mean, that's part of the reason there's so much value, I think, for me from a career standpoint and the recruiting coverage standpoint, because I'm on the ground in Southern California. I'm going to these events and practices, and I'm actually there to see these guys, but I'm not the only one that's trying to talk to them. They have people blowing up their phones all hours of the day, trying to get interviews, trying to get some of their time. You have the coaches at these respective schools that are doing the same thing. So I think it's just a lot, you know, for any recruit to handle. And I think that Aydin Breland definitely strikes me as someone who is ready to be finished with the recruiting process. So some of his answers, some of the stuff that he had to say was similar to what I've heard before. And as far as Oregon's chances here, I think they're better than a lot of people are giving them credit for. We've seen a lot of losses on the recruiting trail for Oregon. Elijah Rushing was one of them, a 5-star edge rusher in the 2024 class out of Arizona. Williams Winery went to Missouri. I don't know if that was as much of a loss because I didn't really think Oregon was a huge contender in that one. But basically what I can say is this. You're only going to continue missing out or losing on guys for so long. It's not a trend that I think, especially for Oregon, is a long-term one. I think that there's just times when you have to look at your class and look at your guys and say, you know, what are we willing to do for said recruit? And I think that even though Oregon's had some losses here, you're going to get some wins eventually. You're going to have those guys that you really go all in on and you just prioritize them and do everything you can to land them. And I think that given where Oregon's at as a program, the defensive line play, that's what takes you to the next level. I feel like Oregon has proven, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, because the offensive line is good. They have good coaches and they have good recruits. But I kind of feel like Oregon has proven that they can do more with less on the offensive line, whereas that's not necessarily the case on the defensive line. They've had some good talent there. Brandon Torres is one of the best defensive linemen in the country. Jordan Birch has a lot of hype. He's a new piece. But the defensive line play has been lackluster at times and hasn't been where it needs to be to get Oregon back into that national championship conversation. So that's why I think Aydin Breland, especially because Dan Lanning's a defensive coach, he's going to be a major, major priority. Like, what do we have to do to get this one done, to get this guy to be a Duck? And he is one of the very best defensive linemen on the West Coast. That said, even though I saw Breland on Friday, he had some good plays. He had some flashes. He did get a little bit banged up and he came out for a while. I just think that the thing with Breland is he's such a physical specimen. He stands out so clearly and so quickly, so obviously, as a defensive lineman and as a high school football player even, I want to see some more of that consistency. I think sometimes he gets eaten up by double teams, and sometimes he doesn't get to the quarterback as quickly as you would hope. That said, Hassan Longstreet, like I said, he was under duress all night, so he was getting the ball out really quickly. So that will kind of naturally hinder or cap the production that you're able to have as a defensive lineman. But he has all the makings of being a great, great defensive lineman at the college level. So I think that people may not be giving Oregon enough credit here in terms of their chances to land Breland. But at the same time, when you're going up against a school like Georgia, back-to-back national titles, NFL development, you name it, they are someone who's very hard to ultimately win a recruiting battle against. But maybe we see a little bit of that Big Ten move play into the equation here now that Oregon's going to be playing some more big-time football and certainly going to have a lot more exposure. So I think the last thing that I would say here in this recruitment, Oregon's defensive line class is already in a really good spot. You have edge rusher Jackson Jones out of Yuma, Arizona. I think he's incredibly underrated in this class, super athletic and twitchy guy. Love what he looks like on tape. Then you have Tion. I don't know if it's Tioni. I also heard Tion Gray from Hazelwood Central in St. Louis, Missouri. He committed to Oregon back in the spring, I think it was. And then you also have Zadavian Sims out of Durant, Oklahoma, who is just an absolute freak of a player. Super, super talented, freaky athlete type of deal. I think he's like 6'4", 6'5", 275, number one player in Oklahoma. So that was a massive recruiting win for Dan Lanning and company. And the Ducks are also going after Jericho Johnson from Fairfield, California, Armijo High School. And that's another guy that they would love to get. He recently put the Ducks in his top 4 along with Utah, Washington, and USC. I think Washington has had some good momentum at various points in that recruitment, but he doesn't get there's not a whole lot of updates out there on Jericho Johnson. I don't think he does a ton of interviews, so I'm trying to get him on the phone and see what I can get out of him. So keep an eye out there. We'll see if I can get him, but that's a 6'4", 300-pound defensive lineman. And if you could wrap up this defensive line haul with Jericho Johnson and Aydin Breland, you would be in a great, great spot. And that's not to mention that the Ducks are also heavily involved with Solomon Williams, an edge rusher out of Tampa, Florida. So keep an eye out for him as well. I'm also going to try to get a hold of him, but sometimes these interviews are hard to get. So that'll do it for today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, however you're tuned in. Do me a favor and share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. I'm going to continue ramping it up over here. We're supposed to talk to Will Stein, Tyshim Johnson, and Stephen Jones today. Those are the guys we're supposed to hear from out of fall camp Monday afternoon in Eugene. So make sure you guys keep an eye on my YouTube channel. I try to update and upload all those press conferences as quick as I can, just to keep it consistent so you guys can hear what the players and coaches are saying in Eugene as we head towards that home opener against Portland State on September 2nd. But a couple places to lock in with me on. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports. Find my YouTube videos, my YouTube channel, and subscribe at Oregon Football Max Torres. And then read my latest written work over on ducksdigest.com. But until next time, everybody have an awesome day. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to talk some ball with me, talk some duck cruitin', and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.